Pushing on, there's an old guy there. That's Adam Smith, who's been much abused by right-wing economists. He's a moral philosopher in his first instance. And I've got an uncle who's an emeritus professor at Heriot-Watt University, and he has dedicated his life to studying Adam Smith. And at family dues, family occasions, we all sit around. Everybody talks about family and kids. We go away in a corner, get a bottle of whiskey, and start talking about economics and Adam Smith. And what we don't really, but it's, yeah, we do. Sometimes we do. Anyway, now long before we had things like bond vigilantes or casino capitalism or even economic textbooks, we had people like Adam Smith, who was talking about 18th century Enlightenment Edinburgh. And what it was a flourishing, a fusion of arts, science, technology, government, produced ideas, tried to unpick the moral obligations within a particular locality. And what Smith would have found bizarre is how absurd it would be to understand a place without understanding the economy, society, and the human frailties within a locality as well. And that Enlightenment then, the 18th century, that moral economy to some extent, is something I think we need to recapture, and it's something that, again, throwing out thoughts that I've been working with the RSA, the Royal Society for the Arts, on, to think about what would a 21st century Enlightenment be. Immanuel Kant says, Enlightenment's the moving from childhood to adulthood. Now, arguably, we've never actually reached adulthood in the Enlightenment, but it seems to me we need to find a way of actually where we have a fusion of place, economy, environment, society as one, which use place as a site for human empathy, and place works, economies that works for people and the place, rather than just working for its own ends. So it's a paradigm shift in consciousness of how we reconceptualize place and recognize place as dependent on complex connections. Focus on relationships is key, and let economics be the glue, the oil, the servant, but clearly never the master. That's the broad background. Moving on, just three kind of things, really, thoughts in terms of how we think about relationships in place and that melding, that fusion, that alchemy of different components within a place. And one thought is resilience. We've done a lot of work on resilience, and I'll share a little bit of thoughts with you. There's Thomas Homer Dixon, a nice book. Resilience is the emergent property of the system. It's not the result of any one of the system's parts, but a synergy of all its parts, which you can see how that resonates with place. It's not just about one thing, it's about all those bits working together in some way. The I Ching, a classic Chinese text, talks about relationships and networks. We've got to look at what connects and separates people, and that's where we find the essence of what society and what our self-improvement should be all about. And there's one of our definitions about economic place resilience, which I'll move forwardly on. So, new ways of thinking through how we interact, a rise in empathy and place consciousness, and we need to think of a range of new tools that promote this new consciousness, which I would see as a call for a new 21st century enlightenment, place enlightenment. Moving on to be a little bit more fluffy. Here we have a bag of rocket and some growing rocket. The bag of rocket on the right, it's vacuum packed, it's got a best before date, it's stuck in a fridge. Yeah? We sustain that bag of rocket. Yeah? On the right, you've got a rocket that doesn't need that kind of intervention. It's got the terroir, it's there living and breathing. Now, if you think about places, in many senses, I think we try to sustain a place by lots of interventions around it. Yeah? What would be intriguing? What would a place be like which didn't need as much interventions? Something in the DNA of place itself. A gentleman earlier on mentioned serendipity. The point was you, wasn't it? Serendipity. What would be a place that allowed serendipity, maxed on serendipity, good serendipity, positive serendipity. These are important questions for place, because we can't think we can do heavy interventions all the time. We need to think about the conditions and the DNA of a particular locality. Eh? Preacher. Preacher, indeed. Serendipity. He's a nutter. Oh no. No, I'll speak to you later on, mate. All right, I'll buy you a drink. You're all right. So the key principle here is the DNA of place. To try and capture the DNA of place, we need to search for and nurture the quality of place, the conditions which harness adaptability. We don't want to keep intervening. Something that's in the place itself that doesn't need that kind of intervention. So resilience means seeing change as the norm, challenging a linear approach to placemaking, not simple cause and effect. To think you can do something and something else will happen, given traffic jams occur in minutes, stock market crashes over days and months, housing markets months, urban regeneration takes years. Impossible to predict. It needs to challenge that linear approach, that you intervene and something happens, and think more about the conditions of that place to deal with it in its own right. It's not just things like parks, buildings, people, community, culture, etc., but it's a relationship they have with one another. So I'm intrigued by this notion of resilient places. What would it be? It would be a place that takes on opportunity. It's a place that appreciates unpredictability, a place that responds to shocks and change, a place that is adaptable. It's a place that ensures our local economies, people and communities are in tune. It's a place that can take a shock, economic or environment, doesn't fall down, doesn't disappear for 35 years before it resurges again. It's a place that can take a punch, can take a bit of a batter, but can actually bounce back up. And I think we're looking for places that go boing. Now, this quest for looking for a place that goes boing took us to a world research trip, and we went to Portland, Coimbatore in India, Haiphong in Vietnam, Gdansk in Poland, Yokkaichi in Japan, Culiacan in Mexico, the good, the bad and the ugly, to try and find what makes places resilient or not. And some of those places were basket cases and some were seen as great, like Portland, which I think is a lot being talked about Portland, but there's talk about just a combination of unique factors that couldn't be replicated, the whole best practice point that Carol talked about. You've got to worry about, you could watch best practice. Anyway, great place, but I don't know how much we can learn from Portland, to be honest. Anyway, we did that international work, and then we came back and done this work in the UK. And what we've been doing is to assessing these localities' resilience, to assess how capable they are of dealing with environmental, economic shocks and change, particularly during the recession. And what you've got here is 8 locations, and most of them are economic functioning territories. They're not one local authority, there's 15 local authorities, so it's the economic functioning area we're looking at. And what we did was we worked closely with the corporate policy and key actors in those localities, drawing on the problems of the recession, but also drawing on other shocks and changes that occurred in those localities. For instance, we looked in Manchester, the IRA bomb, the Irish Republican Army bomb, and how resilient Manchester was to that phenomena, or that incident. We've got this model now, we've got these place leadership things tomorrow, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I'll go into a bit more detail then, and it's getting on. But basically, this is the model. There's 10 relationships that we assess as part of the resilience work. So we go into locality, we do lots of data work and qualitative work around 10 particular relationships. And at the heart of it is this commercial, public and social economy and the relationship between those 3 elements. And we come up, after all that work's done, we have this kind of scenario, this kind of diagram. And what this diagram says is that a place has a particular functioning, a particular performance functioning level. Then a shock or change happens. And what we're interested in, how does it recover? Does it recover quickly and actually goes above its previous performing level because it's actually learnt? Or does it alternately, the shock or change occurs and it's actually got a brittle relationship? That in simple terms is what we've done in the work in terms of assessing localities, though it's a lot more complex than that. I'm conscious of the time. I was going to talk a little bit about social networks, which I think links to what Jane Francis was talking about, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to finish there with a conclusion and say successful places are predicated on social and economic networks and relationships. The public, the commercial and the social economies and their interaction is core. We need to know and knit the social networks and the institutions that are part of those elements. I believe economic resilience is key to placemaking. It's about the DNA of place, it's the adaptability of place, it's about the conditions that allow serendipity to occur. It predicts our ability to deal with change, and I think it helps us to create a guide for the future of our localities. Thanks for listening.